Anything we need to do about China, we need to work closely with our Japan allies, treat Japan seriously as a real power in its own right, and understanding from all different directions instead of being very selective and just like looking at specific functions. East Asia is a very dangerous place these days. You are seeing constant aggression in Japanese borders, in the waters around Taiwan, in the waters around the Philippines. Nippon Steel is fully on board with, they also want a viable American steel industry because that's the whole reason why they made this massive $26 billion investment. Ultimately, businesses need stability and transparency so they can do their business planning. I think that is one of the major challenges that we see going forward.
Diagwit. I'm joined in the studio today by Dr. William Chou. He's a senior fellow and deputy director of the Japan chair at the Hudson Institute. The Hudson Institute is the only think tank in Washington with a deep and sustained focus on Japan. So the Japan chair has long been a bridge between Tokyo and Washington, serving as a forum for Japanese lawmakers and leaders in the US Capitol. So Dr. Cho represents the new generation of scholars carrying that mission forward and shaping the Japan-US relationship for the future. So Dr. Cho, welcome.
Great. Really glad to be here, Dan. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to Japan Forward and all those great leaders. Really big fan of the work Japan Forward does in general and also yours in particular.
It's an honor to finally meet you after all the interviews you've
Oh
done on
boy,
the mail
lots of
list.
emails, lots of emails.
So I wanted to start off by asking you, you chose a topic related to Japanese economics for your PhD, which you
Yeah.
studied here in Japan. So what was it about the country that made you want to stay in this field, and how does that continue in your role today as deputy director and senior
Sure.
fellow?
Yeah, I think, look, Japan is obviously a great and fascinating country, one that is so rich, so much depth, right? And I think one of the big challenges that I often find in Washington is that, how little we still know about Japan, right? Like everyone loves Japan, right? Japan is always the number one country, favorite country in various rankings all over the world.
Right.
But at the same time, I feel like our knowledge of Japan is still lacking, right? We kind of take it a little for granted. And so when I first started working on Japan, it was really because I just didn't want to learn Arabic and I didn't want to live in the Middle East. And I was like, what am I doing for this PhD? No, let me do a topic that I think is important, that I personally was at the time very concerned about China. And I was like, well, I don't want to be the 741st person to work on China. Let me focus on Japan because anything we need to do about China, we
Mm.
need to work closely with our Japan allies. And I think, let's go there, right? No one else is working on US-Japan relations. That's still kind of true
All right.
to some extent. And so I just thought that let's work on that. And I thought, really like Japan is so deeply embedded in American life, right? You look at, you would say that obviously the alliance is the backbone of the US Japan
Mm.
relationship, but economics and commerce is the lifeblood, right?
Right.
The way that Japanese cars, Japanese cameras, Japanese electronics, it's all part of our daily lives. And so let's look at how Japan entered the US market, how they convinced Americans to trust in their goods and their culture, and then how did that evolve over time, along with some of the uncomfortable parts in the 70s and 80s over
Right.
trade frictions, right? But I think that made us a much stronger relationship, a much more in-depth relationship that goes beyond just a simple, military relationship to a multi faceted relationship.
Right. So you touched on it briefly there a second ago, but Hudson's historic focus on Japan, what is it? Is it on the bilateral relationship, or is it democracy or economics?
Sure. I would say, look, the easy answer is obviously to say it's all of them, right? But
Right.
I really do think that Hudson's unique in how we look at Japan because, I think nowadays, I think oftentimes people look at Japan specifically through security or
Mm.
specifically through economics or specifically through culture. But I think, our founder, Herman Kahn, wrote in 1970, right, The Emerging Superstate, Japan.
Mm.
And Herman was a futurist, which means that inherently there would be some things that you will get wrong. But the way that he looked at Japan, right, which is incorporating its culture, its economic power, its political organization, the shared values that the U.S. and Japan share that allow us to be such great partners. This kind of like multi-dimensional approach towards looking Japan, I think that is the most fair way to treat Japan, right? To treat Japan seriously as a real power in its own right and understanding from all different directions instead of being very selective and
Mm.
just like looking at specific functions, which I think is not really how you fully appreciate a close friend like Japan. Instead, you have to sort of take it in its entirety, and I think that's what Herman did back in 1970, and that's what we continue to do at Hudson today.
Yeah, so on your role today, a lot of LDP members seeking the leadership, they visit Hudson. So, how does Hudson view its role in relation to this new generation of Japanese leaders?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of Hudson, obviously Hudson is very grateful for our strong relationship with Japan, and especially with members of the LDP. Although I will clarify that we are friends of all Japanese politicians who support
Okay,
the U.S.-Japan
yeah,
alliance,
clear.
and I didn't say anything. All I said was we are friends with all Japanese politicians who support the U.S.-Japan alliance and obviously democratic governance.
Right.
That said, obviously lots of LDP leaders, both established and emerging ones,
Mm.
come to Hudson, right? Certainly, I think this past April we had Onodera Sensei, obviously Koizumi Sensei, but also emerging lawmakers like Onoda Sensei, right, who's now Minister of Economic Security. And so the way we see it is one, we want to do our part to sort of share with them perspectives from Washington, right? To understand the Washington ecosystem, which is, to be very fair, very confusing and very unorthodox. All right. I know Minister Koizumi spent a year at CSIS, but even then, I mean, there's only so much you can learn about how DC works based on personal relationships, different responsibilities. We try to provide that perspective
Mm.
to these emerging political leaders. But it's also a platform for them to express their views. Oftentimes, again, look, I can write about articles about Japan all day if
Mm.
I ever have any free time.
Right.
But why not just instead let emerging leaders like Onoda, Minister Onoda, talk about what she sees are priorities in the U.S.
Mm.
Japan relationship or regional conditions in Asia, right? So I think it's also a chance to sort of share with the American side perspectives about these emerging leaders who will be forces in their own right, either now or in a very near future.
Mm.
So we sort of see our role as both essentially we're a window, right? We
Okay.
both share Washington perspectives with them, but they also get to share their perspectives with a wider Washington community.
So another point on the LDP, during former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's administration, Hudson was very supportive of him, and now one of his proteges, or one of the LDP
Yeah.
members that he mentored, has become the new LDP leader and the first female Prime Minister of Japan. So, how do you think the Takaichi's lead? How do you think her leadership will affect Japan's policy priorities and the U.S.-Japan relationship? Like, what are the three biggest expectations you
Sure.
have of her administration?
Of course. Yeah, and look, I neglect to say, obviously, I think Hudson has a great relationship in part because of the hard work that of the kind friendship that former Prime Minister Abe extended to Hudson, and in particular to the Japan chair Ken Weinstein, who has been a real force in U.S. Japan relations for um, essentially what 20 years now,
Mm.
right? And so I think, a lot of that is owed to the personal bonds between these two men who have allowed the rest of us to sort of benefit from their leadership and guidance. In terms of Takaichi, Prime Minister Takaichi, right? I think she is also benefiting from the kind friendship between former Prime Minister Abe and President Donald Trump. And I think for her case, look, I think she and Donald Trump have many shared priorities. They're both pro-growth, economic growth type,
Right.
policymakers. They both believe in strong defense and security. They both believe in economic security, and they both believe in strong borders. These are all priorities that they share, and of course, they share their affection for former Prime Minister
Mm.
Abe. These are all common areas of interest. In terms of policy, though, I think I would say the three priorities I really see with the new Takaichi government is one, she needs to rebuild public faith in the government and especially with the LDP. I think, obviously the recent electoral defeats that the LDP faced
Mm,
is due to public dissatisfaction with, say, cost of living issues, quality of life issues, things that, matter to ordinary Japanese.
mm,
And she needs to address those. And she has, right? She has said economics will be my priority. And it's clear that domestic economics will be her priority. The second thing is, I think what we think is very intriguing for her is how she approaches security and economics not as separate issues,
mm,
but as a part of a coherent whole. Now, obviously, she had advantage in this because she served as economic
mm.
security minister a few years ago. But I still think that many people, especially in sort of in some communities, I'm not going to name them, still tend to see politics and security and economics as separate things and separate funnels. And that's just not how it works anymore.
Right.
Certainly, our adversaries don't view it that way, right? And I think she has a realistic and effective policy centric approach towards looking at these things. And then finally, I think it's about, defense, right? I think East Asia is a very dangerous place these days. You are seeing constant aggression in Japanese borders, in the waters around Taiwan, in the waters around the Philippines, right? You are seeing constant aggression here. And obviously, that's not even to mention sort of, missiles flying through the air in the region as well. And so I think she has a realistic way of approaching these security things, which is, one, bring the defense budget up to 2% 2 years early, and then pushing ahead on the next national security plan going forward. And so I think these are the areas where she is definitely policy centric. She is obviously very capable on policy, and I think it's a question of can she secure the domestic support to implement all these policy ideas.
Now, on the topic of economic security, you've written quite extensively about Nippon Steel's acquisition of U.S. Steel, and this is where a lot of our correspondence is based
A
on.
lot of emails.
Yeah. What does that transaction tell us about the future of Japan-US economic security cooperation? Do you think it'll strengthen the alliance, or do you think perhaps it might discourage future Japanese investment in strategic US industries?
Sure. So I think overall it will strengthen the U.S. Japan alliance, right? I think it's very clear that there are unfair economic players in the world, countries that want to overproduce and dump their goods into other markets, create dependencies, hollow out other countries' industries, basically make them beholden to that particular country, right? I think that that's been very apparent. The Nippon Steel US Steel partnership will allow for Nippon Steel to invest capital as well as technology into US Steel, thus reviving the American steel industry in competitive ways that will allow for future generations of steelworkers in places like Western Pennsylvania, in Indiana, and elsewhere. And so I think that's been really important. I think in terms of certainly the U.S. government has gotten involved with the golden share, but that these are measures that Nippon Steel itself essentially agreed to back in December 2024, right? These are not new or radical
Right.
terms. I think the U.S. government has a vested interest in ensuring that American workers are protected. I think, to be very frank, based on everything I've done in my own research, Nippon Steel is fully on board with, they also want a viable American steel industry because that's the whole reason why they made this massive $26 billion investment. They didn't make this investment just so that they can throw their money away so they can shut
Right.
down plants, right? So I don't really see this as a conflict. And I think big picture, I think, certainly I think look, all last year lots of Japanese firms in Washington were asking me, "Hey, Will, like do you think the Trump administration is going to be against foreign investment?" And at the time, I reassured them, I don't think so, based on what I know of Donald Trump.
Mm,
And I think everything we've seen this year has been very much demonstrating that if anything, he really wants foreign investment in the United
mm.
States because I think he realizes how badly the United States needs to revitalize its own industries and secure its own supply chains so that we're not at the mercy of unfair competitors.
So, Japan's commitment to a fairly large investment fund to bolster US industry has sort of raised a few eyebrows. Um, but from Tokyo's perspective, what do you think are the strategic motives that underlie that? And what are the sort of concrete reciprocal benefits that Japan can realistically expect from it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I really appreciate you asking me that question because that's been taking up most of my time for the past 2 months, I would say.
Okay.
The 550 billion strategic investment fund is focused on 9 key strategic sectors, right? Among which include pharmaceuticals, critical minerals, semiconductors, AI, quantum, shipbuilding. These really key industries are foundational to the economic health of each of our countries. And so I think what this fund does is, look, the MOU for the fund stipulated that both countries must any project must comply with the domestic regulations and laws of each country. JBIC's law, the JBIC Act
Mm.
stipulates that all projects that JBIC does must either must be profitable and bankable, and also they must benefit Japan in some way, either through the involvement of Japanese companies
Right.
or offtake that benefits Japanese, access to materials and resources. So I think that is the biggest safeguard that is there, and I think that's why Prime Minister Takaichi appointed Minister Agazawa as mentee minister because
Mm.
he has the institutional knowledge of negotiating this deal, and he is able to then to best argue for Japan as they hash out the terms of potential projects with under the auspices of this deal. And so I think that is a very important appointment, and that's why I believe she appointed him in that position. The other consideration is also that with this deal, what this fund does is essentially allow Japanese firms and American firms who may take on slightly risky but absolutely necessary
Mm.
projects that need to be done, right? So, for instance, critical minerals.
Mm.
That is something that repeatedly for the past several months we have seen that if we don't do something about it, uh, unfair actors will continue to blackmail
Mm.
us over our dependency on it. And so that inherently is a challenging industry because the quantities are so low, the prices
Mm.
are so intransparent, but we still need to do it.
Mm.
And so this is an area where the fund can be used to expand on these mining or processing
Mm.
initiatives that otherwise would never get off the ground. And so I think this is how ultimately this strategic investment fund
Mm.
will best support the priorities of both countries.
I'm glad you brought up critical minerals.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, I'm really glad
I talk about it way too much.
because like China has shown that it can weaponize
Mm,
critical material
yeah.
exports. So how urgent do you think it is for the US, Australia, and
Yeah.
Japan to diversify its supply chains for rare earths and other critical inputs? Like what progress are we seeing with that? And like, are there any gaps you think we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, so I think the progress that we have done so far, it's good, right? I think most notably, the biggest announcement was one, the gallium project between Sojitz, Jaga, Alcoa, and in Western Australia. I think that's been a great success because gallium is so vital to both commercial and defense articles. I think that's a great step in the right direction. The U.S. Japan, I'm sorry, the U.S. Australia Critical Minerals
Right.
Agreement from last week, I think, is a great step in that direction. I suspect that there will likely be some kind of announcement between the U.S. and Japan on critical minerals as well. I think we're having challenges. One, it's one thing to mine it, but it's
Mm.
another thing to process it.
Right.
And so I think processing plants involve regulatory issues that oftentimes are not entirely federal.
Mm.
They are on the state level, and so that creates another layer of bureaucracy that needs to be uh, resolved,
Right.
right? Let's just say that's one. The other thing is that we still have fundamentally we have price intransparency, right? When China controls 95% or 90%, depending on your numbers, of all the processing for critical minerals and especially rare earths, it's impossible to really know what the actual proper price is,
Right.
right? And so that's something where I think, look, it's great that we need more private sector to sign on for offtake agreements to provide security to the mining companies to ensure that their work will not be wasted. But we also need some kind of mechanism to ensure that there are fair market prices for these minerals so that long term there is stability, there's business stability, right? Ultimately, businesses need stability and transparency so they can do their business planning. I think that is one of the major challenges that we see going forward. And so I think if we can address the issue of processing as well as price transparency, as well as possibly also having a clear idea of exactly how the supply chain looks like and where the vulnerabilities are. I think those three areas are probably what we need to do next.
So just another question on economic security. Like finally, economic security is a mainstream policy frame in Tokyo now.
Yeah.
Do you expect the new LDP Ishin leadership to keep that agenda front and center? And how do you think Japan might evolve its stance to sort of better balance investment, national security, and growth?
Sure. I think, look, when you have an administration with a prime minister who is the former minister for economic security, a party policy chief who is also a former minister of economic security, and also one of the rising stars in the party as minister of economic security, I think it's pretty safe to say that economic security is pretty important to these guys, right? But even looking beyond that, right? I think where this government will really focus on economic security is sort of in both directions. Right, one is both about running faster and also defending Japan's leadership. Right, defending Japan's leadership is about areas where Japan has established technological leads and ensuring that one that information that technology is not stolen or acquired, that the business are not acquired, and that's partly done through certainly export control laws as well as the new regulations over financial inbound and outbound transactions. The other way is also through running faster, right? So investing in R&D in new commercially viable avenues where Japan can establish a technological lead, work with its allies and partners to sort of stabilize that leadership, and then to find ways for Japanese firms to invest in these areas so that Japan can strengthen its economic position and be a true economic force in a way that will really be the basis of Japan's regional and global influence. Yeah.
So just a question on the Japan-US alliance.
Mhm.
Over time, trust in alliances can shift.
Sure.
So today, how strong or resilient do you think the Japan-US popular support is?
Sure.
And what do you think leaders on both sides or policymakers on both sides can do to bolster confidence, public confidence
Sure.
in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the U.S.-Japan alliance is very strong. I think it's clear that we are highly we rely on each other a great deal in a lot of different dimensions. I think the challenge these days is the fact that I think voters, especially facing a lot of economic challenges at home, they are asking the question, well, what is the purpose of this alliance, right? I think we at places like Hudson and within the government and if I may say so, certain outlets like Japan Forward have to continue to explain why this alliance matters and real ways that matter to real people, right? I think, I mean, I think this is apparent through the Nippon Steel case where like a lot of people were saying, "Oh, well, if you block this deal, you'll hurt the U.S.-Japan alliance." Well, but you didn't actually explain in what ways will actually hurt us, right? If you can show that, hey, blocking this deal will mean that Chinese steel companies will more easily break into the U.S. market, dump their goods, make American industry much more reliant on Chinese steel and hollow out
Mhm.
the American industry. That's a really compelling argument for why the U.S. Japan alliance really matters, right? And so that's one of my biggest criticisms of the former administration, which is that they never made that very easy argument about, hey, this is what this is the hostile economic security environment that we face. Our competitors are trying to do these things, and we need to work together closely with our closest friends in ways to ensure that Americans and Japanese and other ordinary every other folks in other countries can benefit from a free and open rule of law based economic environment, and I think that argument has to be made.
So, with the US now pursuing industrial policy through the CHIPS Act, IRA,
Sure.
how do you think Japanese firms are perceiving these moves? Do they see it as opportunity for cooperation or protectionist hurdles?
Sure. I mean, look, I think the Trump administration has been extremely active, right? I think the president was frustrated with some of his experiences in his first term, and I think he is determined to make his leave his historical legacy in this term, and two, do everything that he intends on doing as quickly as possible. So I think we have all been essentially digesting a lot of his very proactive, energetic actions. That said, I do think that these are opportunities for Japanese firms, right? I think the administration has been very clear that it welcomes foreign investment. It will facilitate the ability for foreign companies to be successful here. And I think you look at the 550 billion investment fund, right? It stipulates that again, Japanese firms must benefit. Two, Japanese firms get preferential treatment in terms of as suppliers, as contractors, as key parts of this larger project, right? So I think that's an area where Japan can really benefit. I think what needs to be done for Japanese firms, if I can be very honest, is that they need to be proactive, right? This is an administration that has repeatedly demonstrated that yes, they are very energetic. They do make a lot of policy introductions and changes, and sometimes it's kind of hard to keep track.
Mm,
That said, this is also an administration that is very open to hearing advice from others, right? I mean, you see what has been done on essentially export credits for companies that import cars into the United States. That was introduced in April, I think, probably likely with some Japanese conversations. And then more recently, they extended it further from 2027 to 2030. And so I think this is an administration that, yes, I know that some would love to paint it as like they're not friendly to foreign investment or whatnot. I think they are,
mm,
but you have to seize the opportunity, and you have to be proactive. And you have to make a good case for yourself, and it just means more work. Um, but as the prime minister says, work, work, work.
mm. So, just to finish off, one question on diplomacy. Japanese diplomacy has become more active
Mm,
with Indo Pacific initiatives,
yeah.
G7, closer ties with NATO allies. Do you see this as a structural shift in Tokyo, or do you see this as something that might ebb and flow depending on leadership? Um, you know, what's your opinion on that?
Sure. I mean, look, I think personalities do dictate a lot about the direction of foreign policy. I think looking at my own country, you can see it between, what is it? Yeah, a year ago and this year. That said, I do think in the case of Japan, I think Japan has really, changed. I mean, this is obviously in great part to former Prime Minister Abe, who definitely put Japanese foreign policy and security policy on a much more realistic path, right? One that recognizes the challenges that one faces and the need to be proactive. And so I think Japan has been, ever since his leadership and with that of his successors, been part of this larger engagement, regionally as well as globally, right? Certainly, I think the adverse global conditions have compelled Japan to be much more engaged on security issues, on energy security issues, on economic security issues. But I think it's also credit to Japanese leadership who are trying to grapple with a much more dangerous world and realizing that they can't just, sit, wait for others to take the lead. They themselves can shape the world, and I think that's evident through former Prime Minister Abe's vision of the free and open Indo-Pacific concept. I think it was evident through the Kishida government's promotion of the Asia zero emissions community, which really helps you know Asian countries transition go through the energy transition by relying on much more realistic sources of energy, like American natural gas and Japanese distribution of it, rather than on being, dependent on Chinese sources of renewable energy that are actually made with quite dirty energy, right? And so I think Japan has really been leading the way, and I think there's a lot to admire about the way Japan is pursuing these foreign policy goals in its own way. It doesn't do it loudly,
Mm.
but it is quite effective, and I think we need a Japan that is continues to try to take the lead in these areas, and we have to continue to find more ways to work more effectively between Washington and Tokyo.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, thank
Dr.
you.
Chou, thank you very much for your time. This has been Tokyo Outpost with Dr. William Chou. Thanks for watching.